staying safe in an age of unconventional attacks. Have preparedness and security reached their limits? Also on today's program, supersized sacrilege. McDonald's opens just meters from St. Peter's Basilica, but Vatican City cardinals aren't loving it. And Myanmar's forgotten refugees. We ask what it will take for the world to care about the displaced Rohingya. I'm Imran Garta, and this is the Newsmakers. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Istanbul. It seems with each new week comes another deadly attack in a cosmopolitan city somewhere, at nightclubs, airports, markets, and in response, the obligatory boosting of security and questions of how it was able to happen in the first place. Turkish officials are still trying to answer that as they continue to search for the gunman who killed 39 people at the Reyna nightclub on New Year's Day. There were thousands of police officers on duty across Istanbul that night, and a nationwide state of emergency was recently extended. On top of that, the Turkish government says it prevented more than 300 attacks in 2016. And yet, the nation continues to be rattled by killings. So, what can really be done to better protect people? Should governments continue to take traditional approaches like bolstering police forces and surveillance? Or does that ignore a significant shift in the state of terrorism today, which demands new solutions to an old problem? Our newsmaker today is global security. And we begin with this report from Natalie Pahernan.
In the moments after an attack, victims are treated, security is stepped up, and the manhunt for those responsible begins. It's a pattern no nation wants to endure. But Turkey was flung into it again when 39 people were killed at the Reyna nightclub. Security was tight in Istanbul on New Year's Eve. 25,000 police officers were on duty. Reyna itself had standard protection in place. There were some security guards and a police officer out front. Yet the attacker was able to take a taxi to the club, enter from the street, shoot his way through, and simply walk away after the massacre. So what, if anything, can be done to minimise the threat of urban terrorism in the first place? In the wake of attacks in France, Belgium, Germany, and Turkey, security measures have been tightened at large gatherings and in public areas. And that's usually been in the form of highly visible and physical precautions, from cordoning off spaces to boosting the police and military presence at venues, a move designed to both deter an attack and reassure the public, which was the case in Berlin ahead of New Year celebrations.
Wir werden im Bereich der Festmeile am Brandenburger Tor Betonpoller aufstellen und auch gepanzerte Fahrzeuge der Polizei im Einsatz haben. Und zusätzlich werden Polizisten mit Maschinenpistolen ausgerüstet sein.
This kind of action is now considered normal, a fair cost for the price of safety. But ultimately, prevention is about what happens outside the public's view. And that's the role played by the intelligence community. They are the front line of counter-terrorism, trusted by the public and governments to monitor, track, and prevent attacks by interpreting chatter. But they also face a more complicated and complex security environment, with threats coming from diverse groups and individuals. And with much of their work hidden, it's hard to identify how to improve their ability to thwart attacks, and whether it is possible to stop would-be perpetrators. Natalie Pahernan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Mohammed Alibiari from Dallas. He's a former advisor to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, which was created to protect Americans from terror attacks. And from Cardiff, Lee Doddridge. He's the director of a private security firm, Covenant, and a former member of the UK's National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to try and separate out the issues here so we can stay organized in our thinking. Lee, let me start first with the sort of physical threat prevention in this age of terror, because you can set up a barrier and they can blow themselves up outside a barrier, they can blow up people at the barrier, blow themselves through the barrier, or take a truck and ram through the barrier. How do governments around the world actually deal with physical threat prevention when it seems as if somebody is determined to kill innocents, they more often than not get away with it?
Well, you've highlighted straight away the myriad of attack options that we face, and obviously if there's a number of options that they can attack, as in the methods that they use, then obviously we have to look at a number of combined defences. There's no point, defending against maybe just a vehicle driving into somewhere, when actually if that vehicle was to stop and detonate, there's a whole range of issues that we need to look at, understand, and then build in and design what we call integrated security. So we've got layers upon layers. So one location could defend against a number of different attacks.
Mohammed, are we getting better or worse globally in fighting these asymmetric threats, particularly from a group like Daesh?
I think it depends on which country we're talking about. Certainly in the West, and especially in the United States and the United Kingdom, I would say we've gotten a whole lot better in the past couple of decades. In other countries, developing nations specifically, with weak central governance, population-based insurgencies that have proven themselves resilient over the decades, I am not as convinced that we are making progress. We're kind of recycling in those countries.
Mohammed, we see quite often countries almost in a knee-jerk way after a terror attack, particularly by a group like Daesh, whether it's the French or even in Turkey, we've seen it, and elsewhere, they'll bomb Raqqa or bomb an ISIS stronghold in the immediate aftermath of an ISIS attack. Does that help or does it not help?
The tool of deterrence, which those attacks are a tactical step to produce deterrence, have an effect if those terrorist groups, especially Daesh, that are trying to govern an area, experience a loss. But for groups that do not cover or do not control and govern a geographic location, deterrence is not as effective. The reprisal attacks, so to speak, don't work as well.
Lee, is the danger that they're trying to draw you into a fight that you don't want to get into?
I don't think there's a danger of being drawn into further conflict, and I totally agree with what Mohammed just said there. But I would also say that we need to almost balance the response, as in, yes, the deterrence and maybe striking at the heart of the cause, but at the same time focusing our resources on what we can do internally to defend against future attacks. So it's not just a single response in a retaliating factor. There is also looking at other areas where we can strengthen internally and make it a combined effort.
Mohammed, let's move on to bad ideas, battling bad ideas, policing, counter-radicalization programs, and so on. In the year 2017, we've just begun, are we doing better or are we doing worse in trying to get to the heart of the matter and stop those bad ideas?
Unfortunately, I think in this age where we, especially in the West, are experiencing middle-class economic squeeze that's driving a lot of political anxiety from populist nationalisms on the rise, we're not seeing ourselves getting better. We're actually seeing a little bit of a regression. Especially in the United States, we're expecting a little bit more of a regression in this upcoming administration as compared to the previous one.
Lee, is the problem that many people see it as binary? We either are going to be safe or we're going to be unfree, and there's very little in between.
Well, I think we have to recognise the fact that this is a long-term threat issue that we're going to be facing. We also have to balance that with people being able to go about their daily lives, going about their business, welcoming tourists, and making our streets and our locations, whether it's in the United States, in the UK, or elsewhere in Europe. We need to get that balance in place. And it is something that we've been working and striving at in the UK now since, probably way back since 2001. I would say where we're probably failing at the moment in the UK in particular is still focusing on our Muslim communities. Only just recently we had a press release from a senior Metropolitan Police officer who pretty much made a statement to say that, you know, the communities must come forward and trust us in giving us information. And I think they're quite wrong in focusing purely on Muslim communities. If we have a threat from ISIS, they're probably going to stay outside of those communities, and it should be drummed more into the mind of every community and not singling out a group. And I think we'll be, you know, wrong if we still pursue that form of education.
Right, Mohammed, parallels maybe with when the NYPD shut down their program spying on the Muslim community there. And I remember going through it. There was a lot of stuff about taxi drivers being suspicious because they went to Afghan kebab restaurants, right? And so you had all this manpower, the NYPD, following these people because of what they ate, right? What lessons can be sort of derived from those mistakes, like the NYPD's?
I definitely agree with everything Lee just outlined. There's the NYPD approach was considered, for example, in the early Obama administration, the one that you just recently referenced, where it's very surveillance heavy over communities, and then basically injecting a whole lot of undercover law enforcement in there to report on anything. And pretty soon you can over capacity build and chase and go down a lot of rabbit holes that waste law enforcement resources. Today, radicalization or violent radicalization is mostly an online delivered reality, especially in the United States. So going into the coffee shops or the hookah bars or the local falafel restaurants is not necessarily, or the mosques is not necessarily going to identify those.
So, Mohammed, sorry to interrupt you. How do we then stop that, the online radicalization, without pulling the plug on the internet and becoming totalitarian police states?
So I have, over the past 15 years, evolved a little bit also in my own analysis. I think today that you need to have law enforcement and security officials should have total awareness. So we as the public should accept that law enforcement and intelligence agencies should have total access to things online so that they can identify, so to speak, the dots to be able to connect behavior indicative of radicalization. But we should also, as functioning democracies in the West, provide a great deal of oversight and operational oversight from outside of the executive branch. And that mechanism, at least in the United States, is not currently available. And that's way the public will have confidence that the tools they are given to law enforcement and intelligence agencies are not being misused.
So is that sort of the digital equivalent of like needing a court order for a wiretap? You need some sort of court order in order to go into somebody's Facebook or Twitter?
Or I don't think you should bog it down by the court order step. You should go ahead. They should be able to go ahead and proactively follow up on whatever tip they get immediately, and just have it reviewed later by maybe a FISA court or something. Okay. But they need to have the ability to, encryption is a big issue that pops up in this sphere. But in developing countries, the issue is a little bit different. They're not necessarily talking about experiencing the same problem. Most of right now, the developing countries, especially in the Middle East, are becoming a lot more autocratic. And that repression is creating its own popular discontent in different subpopulations.
Okay, we are running out of time.
That's a political problem.
Sure, but Mohammed, sorry to interrupt you. We are running out of time. I want to get a final word from Lee as to whether he agrees with you that intelligence agencies and police agencies and so on, security services, should be able to go into people's digital work, their chatter and so on, and only have a review process after that. They don't have to seek permission beforehand. What do you think, Lee?
I think with the, as Mohammed said, I mean, it's the the frequent use of these communication channels is just, you know, it's so vast that we do need a policy change there. I mean, the recent last year that we saw in the States, with the, you know, federal agencies trying to get Apple to unlock an iPhone. I mean, these sort of things, you know, need to be happening almost instantaneously. If it means, you know, we need to get access into Telegram or to somebody's Facebook account. And yes, there should be processes and procedures in place in governing bodies to make sure that you know, everything is monitored accordingly.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. There's a new way of indulging at the Vatican. It won't pay for your sins, but may meet a more physical need. The Holy See is now providing pilgrims with Happy Meals after fast food giant McDonald's opened up a franchise in a Vatican-owned building just steps from St. Peter's Square. But corporate America's conquest of the geographic heart of the Roman Catholic Church is proving controversial. Cardinals say they weren't consulted, and people fear it will hurt local businesses and erode the city's cultural identity. So, is it a sign of the times? Yvette McCullough has the story.
It's one of the most sacred places in the world. More than 6 million people visit Vatican City each year. A site steeped in tradition and history. But now, just a stone's throw away from St. Peter's Square, a more modern icon has appeared: McDonald's. And it's proving controversial. Some cardinals think it's inappropriate, raising concerns that a commercial establishment does not belong in the holy area, and that it disrespects Roman culinary and architectural traditions. Many locals share similar concerns.
It's an American multinational corporation and they let them open a restaurant in the ancient neighborhood.
Pope Francis regularly speaks out against consumerism, but the Vatican is in on this deal. It owns the building and, according to local media, is paid a monthly rent of 30,000 euros. Critics say that the Roman Catholic Church should have set up a social centre instead, a space to help the needy. When Michelangelo designed the famed Dome of the Vatican, he would never have expected the arrival of these iconic golden arches nearby. Surveys have shown they're more widely recognised around the world than the Christian cross, with 88% able to identify them compared to 54%. McDonald's has more than 35,000 locations worldwide and sells 75 hamburgers every second. This is not the first time the restaurant chain has caused controversy. In Florence, the local government blocked its application to open a store in a popular tourist destination. But while some are concerned, others don't understand the fuss.
I think there are more serious problems in the world than whether McDonald's is too close to St. Peter's.
In a globalized world, it is something positive. The fact that there is a McDonald's that everybody can afford.
Are these modern symbols representing the dominant culture of our time? Or is consumerism spiritually bankrupting society? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Rome is Father Robert Gull. He's a professor of ethics at Pontifical University of the Holy Cross. Thanks a lot for joining us, Father Robert. So, does this defile the sanctity of the Vatican, or does even Pope Francis need a cheeseburger from time to time?
It really is a striking change of the imagery here around the Vatican, and it is truly very close to the Vatican, less than a block. So it is a bit surprising, but Pope Francis said to young people that they should go and shake things up. And since the beginning of the Catholic Church, there's always been a mix of the sacred and the human. And I think McDonald's is a response to that mixture. Even those golden arches that represent the M of McDonald's, some Catholics might see them as representing the M of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Michelangelo was here designing the Basilica of St. Peter's when obelisks from Egypt that had pagan hieroglyphs is carved into them were simply put up as decoration with a cross on top. So why not sanctify the mundane and the human? Besides, the pilgrims get hungry.
Yeah, that's a good point, and good point of Michelangelo. Now, you'd be aware of Cardinal Elio Screccia, and I hope I'm saying his name right. He's called this a controversial, perverse decision, to say the least. The mega sandwich shop, that's what he calls it. The mega sandwich shop on Borgo Pio is a disgrace. What would you say to that?
Well, especially the neighborhood in Borgo Pio, close to the Vatican, that neighborhood is especially old-fashioned, I would say. And there's this attitude that is embedded in the neighborhood of the princely culture that has grown around the Vatican. And that's exactly one of the things that Pope Francis has resolved to shake up when he sought to reform the church and to reform the Vatican Curia, as it's called, from being a princely court to being a real engine, a modern engine of global evangelization. That's what Pope Francis has set out to do, and in fact, he described it very recently in his address to the Roman Curia at Christmas time. And he said how difficult it is to reform the church because there are so many obstacles to doing so. And there's obstacles also to true competition, which is a way of making good use of the resources and the investments that the Vatican has in order to help the church in poor countries throughout the world. So now we have a transparent accounting. We even know how much rent McDonald's is paying to the Vatican.
Yeah, that's interesting.
A market price.
So are you saying this is decent, good, solid business sense from the Vatican?
Absolutely. Finally, there's competition, even regarding the Vatican's own properties. In fact, the question that we can ask Cardinal Elios Grecia is how much was being paid for the property prior to this, and where are these funds going? Pope Francis has promised that there will be accountability and transparency in the Vatican, and that these funds can be used to help the poor. And we can see that Pope Francis is doing just that on a daily basis, helping the poor who come to the Vatican asking for the most basic assistance.
Yeah, Cardinal Grecia called it, as I mentioned, the mega sandwich shop. I shudder to think what he would call a Pizza Hut in the Vatican. He'd probably go absolutely berserk. But I mean, health-wise, would it have perhaps made a bit of a difference if it was something like a salad shop or a pret-a-manger, an international chain, but something that wasn't an American cheeseburger? Is the symbolism more of the issue here, and the fact that this food is just so unhealthy, I guess?
Well, McDonald's is an icon of capitalism. It's an icon the world over for American competitiveness. But wherever there's a McDonald's, there's economic freedom. It was impossible for McDonald's to grow into beyond the Iron Curtain of the communist bloc. And in a similar fashion, the Catholic Church is present everywhere where you have freedom, economic freedom. So it can be interpreted in different ways. The McDonald's is a globalized company. It's a global company that has a strong brand. And they also try to, what we call in the Catholic Church, enculturate, that they try to put on their menu specific items from the country and the culture in which they're selling these things. Here in Italy, they offer on their menu a Mac Sweetie, which has Nutella, chocolate and hazelnut cream inside the bread. So maybe this is also a way that the Catholic Church can see it even as an application of the theology of inculturation. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Well, we have Nutella everywhere here in Istanbul. So now there's two models to like this opening up, right? So there was the Starbucks in the Forbidden City in Beijing. They shut that down when people complained. On the other hand, in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, you had people initially complain that they had a shopping mall very close to the Haram al-Sharif, and the Saudi government went ahead with that, and now you have this massive clock tower, a huge shopping mall. Not only do you have the American chains, but you have sort of Burger King, Starbucks, McDonald's, whatever you want in that shopping mall just steps away from the Kaaba. So do you accept that, the Chinese recognize that there could be a slippery slope, and that's why there's so much pushback to just a single McDonald's when it begins?
Actually, I hope that this will be an engine of creativity and innovation and competitiveness in this very neighborhood, because it really is the case that these millions of pilgrims come and they can be exhausted and tired after spending 3-4 hours in a liturgy, listening to the Pope speak from his window on a Sunday when he addresses the crowd, speaking at the time of the Angelus. And then they're hungry and they're going out for lunch. And there's a need for a new competitiveness. And hopefully there will be also Italian slow food of the best cuisine ready at also a good market price for families and for people who are middle-class families.
Okay, you're making me hungry. Father Robert Gull, thanks for that. Thanks for joining us from Rome. It's time to go off script. Another little boy drowned while fleeing violence. Mohammed Shuhayat was 16 months old, a Rohingya refugee. Echoes of Alan Kurdi, the Syrian boy whose death thrust Syrian refugees into the spotlight. Will this picture do the same for the Rohingya? Myanmar's government says the image is false and they've dismissed it as propaganda, but they won't let in any reporters so that we can independently verify it. Mohammed's family was trying to cross a river to Bangladesh, following tens of thousands of other Rohingya who made it across. You see, Myanmar's Rohingya Muslims were stripped of their citizenship, even if they were born there. In 2012, violence between Buddhists and Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine State saw the government force Rohingyas into squalid camps. In Myanmar, the government says they don't belong here. They call them Bengalis. But when they flee to Bangladesh, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina says the Rohingya, they're not our problem. So who is responsible? Should this be escalated at the UN? But Myanmar has been back in from the cold, open for international business after decades of military dictatorship. Thailand recently came out in support of leader Aung San Suu Kyi, who has been accused of ignoring the Rohingya, saying she needs time to fix this sensitive issue. But what if there's no time left to waste? People see images like Muhammad's and they ask, is this a humanitarian crisis? Is it a political crisis? Just like Syria, it's both. But who is prepared to do anything about it? And do we care less about the Rohingya because the death toll is in the hundreds and not the hundreds of thousands? Because the number of displaced is in the tens of thousands and not in the millions? Is that our metric? Let us know what you think. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.